Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Ottawa tonight, where the Carney government introduced legislation Thursday that seeks to tighten the rules around applying for bail for those charged with certain crimes. But some fear the proposed changes will only lead to an even greater overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples within the prison system. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
Justice Minister Sean Fraser spoke at a press conference outside the Department of Justice building in Ottawa Thursday afternoon. He said Canadian streets are not as safe as they used to be, but admitted the government doesn't have data on whether people on bail commit more crimes.
When it comes to the management of bail and the data collection of the bail system, there's obviously a role for provinces to play as well. The ability of the court to actually enforce some of these rules will depend on a change in practices in some circumstances of the province's need to collect data about what kind of offences are going through the bail system and are actually leading to a bail decision in one direction or another.
At the presser, Fraser spoke about Bill C-14. If it passes, an accused will be more likely to be denied bail, because the accused will have to prove they should be granted bail rather than on the prosecution arguing they should be denied. Jonathan Rudin is the Special Projects Director of Toronto-based Aboriginal Legal Services. He said it is already incredibly difficult to get bail in our system, and the proposed changes will only negatively affect Indigenous people.
So this notion that we have this crisis, so many people are getting released from custody, from bail, and going out and committing crimes, that's just not happening. And that's a concern. And of course, from our perspective, the biggest concern is most of these amendments, most of these tougher on crime, purported tougher on crime amendments, have a disproportionately negative impact on Indigenous people. And that's obviously one of our real concerns.
When asked if the legislation would only increase the number of Indigenous people behind bars, Fraser said the government is working with Indigenous organizations to ensure this does not happen.
I've had a number of conversations in recent weeks in particular about the importance of implementing the Indigenous justice strategy, on working not just with provinces and territories, but with Indigenous governments to understand how we can have enhanced community policing, enforcement of Indigenous laws that are adopted by communities, and relying on solutions that are advanced by individual First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities more broadly.
In separate press releases, the Canadian Police Association applauded the proposed changes, while the Canadian Civil Liberties Association panned them. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Thanks, Fraser. The Canadian Armed Forces will be making a formal apology to veterans who have faced racial discrimination and harassment next week in Ottawa. Amongst the crowd will be a 66-year-old retired corporal from the Lake Manitoba First Nation in southern Manitoba. He was one of the first to openly speak out about the issue. With his story, here's T.R. Wheatley.
30 years after the fact, I'm giving an apology.
Retired Corporal Melvin Swan says it's going to be bittersweet to hear the words, "We are sorry." He's been invited to Ottawa for a formal military apology on October 30th.
In my personal opinion, my health and body has been affected, as well as my spirit. There's so much distrust. I had nothing for 20 years. No veterans benefits, nothing.
In 1994, Swan won a human rights case against the military. The tribunal ruled the forces violated his rights by not properly investigating at least 8 specific cases of racism.
Many instances of discrimination under the Charter of Rights, Sections 7, 10, and 14.
Swan joined when he turned 18.
First I became a Patricia, PPCLI, for 4 years, then I remustered to the military police. The badge I wore was a Thunderbird. The Thunderbird is personal with me. It's my spirit, my name. And for them to run away from me, not want to hear the truth, it's ironic.
He left in 1988 after serving 12 years.
I loved the military, and it was my place to go to after day school, residential school, and boarding school. So the military, ironically, was my saving grace.
He attended the Mackay Residential School in Dauphin, Manitoba.
And for this, we are sorry.
Swan heard those words once before in Ottawa in June 2008 as a survivor of the IRS system. But he says this soon-to-be military apology is much more personal. He's hoping to line up meetings in the near future to discuss recommendations moving forward.
What goes beyond this apology, I think, is I want to see a spiritual health policy for Veterans Affairs to adapt, first of all, so they can look at our traditional way of life and acknowledge who we are in this country, because without that, there's no truth and reconciliation. I want to see more integration and training for our people with an Indigenous regiment here in Winnipeg.
Expanding on opportunities like the Bold Eagle and Junior Ranger programs, both of which he had a helping hand in getting off the ground. Tiara Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The First Nations University of Canada celebrated the grand opening of the Niwaskan Traditional Campus. Although it's already been utilized by students, a partnership with federal and provincial governments made it possible to enhance the campus. Video journalist Rachel May was at the celebration.
It's the center of what we do at First Nations University of Canada.
First Nations University of Canada President Dr. Jacqueline Ottman explains the importance of traditional and land-based learning for students.
We don't have to expend energy on trying to get voice for our knowledges and our traditions, to get all of those approvals so we can have smudge and lift a pipe.
The Niwaskan Traditional Campus is located along the South Saskatchewan River near St. Louis. The provincial and federal governments contributed $2.4 million, while the university added $1 million to make the campus accessible for visitors. Ottman says securing funding to make the traditional campus ready for students is an investment that will be felt for generations to come.
This is our fourth campus, and whatever we do is not only for the students today, who will impact their communities, but it's for the students 7 generations and beyond into the future.
The traditional campus is the university's fourth, alongside Prince Albert, Saskatoon, and Regina. Ottman says that while urban campuses are important, having a space where students can connect with the land is essential.
We have incredible teachings and sophisticated knowledges, complex knowledges, and sometimes what we need to do is disconnect from various distractions that could act as barriers to deeper forms of learning. And so when you drive out here, you're disconnecting from the city.
The campus now features enough natural space for students to camp and learn about Mother Nature. Several programs require students to spend between 4 and 10 days on the land, learning about culture and traditional knowledge. Prince Albert Grand Council Director of Education Ed Morasti says the traditional campus helps keep history alive and shapes the future.
And that's why it's these places here that act as third places, as they call it, where we can share and feel safe to share our stories, our histories, so that we come in as settlers, we come in as Indigenous peoples, and we share the history of colonization and how we can move forward in reconciliation.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Time for a quick break, and then our Truth and Politics panel will be here to discuss the Auditor General of Canada's report. Stick around. Welcome back. Canada's Auditor General says Indigenous Services is failing to deliver on its promises. Karen Hogan said this week that despite a staggering 84% increase in funding, Indigenous Services failed to implement more than half of the previous recommendations to improve programs and services made over the last decade. Of particular concern are access to clean drinking water and emergency management. That is our topic on this week's Truth and Politics panel. With us as always is Jennifer Leywitz, the CEO of Pusquewa Strategies, and Negon Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, great to have you both with us. Jennifer, an Auditor General progress report released this week found that despite a massive increase in funding at Indigenous Services Canada from $13 billion to $24 billion, programs and services have not improved, and in fact, in some cases, ISC has actually lost ground. Your thoughts on what's going on here?
I think this was kind of to be expected, and I think I've been kind of saying this for a few years now, that I think, you know, the ballooning of the bureaucracy didn't do what they thought it was going to do. The bureaucracy doubled in 2017. That was a Justin Trudeau move. And at the time, you know, I kind of saw the benefit in having those separate departments between ISC and CERNAC. But the problem is that the bigger you get, the harder it is to actually reach the people on the ground. So I'm really not surprised to see that, you know, maybe there were these really high level promises or really even good intentions regarding program delivery and actually seeing change, but it just didn't seem to get to the ground as much as it should have, according to this report.
Well, Negon, speaking of big promises, one of the major concerns raised was with access to clean drinking water. A decade ago, Justin Trudeau pledged to end long-term drinking water advisories. And some were ended, but the number even increased during the auditor's reporting, now at 38, with 9 being more than a decade old. Your thoughts there?
Just a broken system continues to be broken. It continues to be just a quick story. When my father was working on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he noticed that the bureaucracy in Ottawa really, when you shepherd in and create a new department, you often get people who are often cast off of other departments. And on top of that, you also get a kind of way in which the bureaucracy creates more bureaucracy. People need assistance, people need multiple directors for the same project, those kinds of things. And so it's really indicative that there is a kind of culture of bureaucracy that I think is indicated by this report. It's also indicated that that money's not getting to the ground, as Jen spoke about. There is not a kind of sense of competency in communities. And while there is been some attempts by the Trudeau government to deal with some of the boil water advisories, the human infrastructure was not always there, or often they were very placed within 1 or 2 people. And so if you remove that one person, for instance, they retire, or for instance, they transfer out, they get another job, that there's not that infrastructure there to maintain that continuance of keep those boil water advisories from re-emerging again. There is a real problem within the culture of Indigenous Services Canada. And one of the really interesting things was just to watching the way Minister Galmasti was sort of tapping, moving around and trying to cover for what has been a long-standing problem within the culture of the department, but then saying, oh, we're going to have a reset, this is a renewal. Like, how many renewals do we need before we realize there's a problem?
Right. Jen, emergency response capacity, the ability of First Nations and the federal systems that support them to prepare for, respond, and recover from emergencies like floods and wildfires has also declined. I believe the auditor's reporting period ended in like April. So were we seeing this all play out, what she wrote this past summer?
Yeah, especially with wildfires. And I'm going to play the devil's advocate in the sense that I was seeing the province get pretty beat up over a lot of the wildfires that were happening, especially up in the north, and a lot of that resources, not in terms of just fighting the fires, because the province has a huge responsibility when it comes to forestry management and fire management in our province, but just even like the financial support to people that were displaced from First Nations. I had heard, and whether or not it's completely true, is that, you know, the Red Cross were responsible for a lot of this. And I had even some bureaucrats saying, like, they've just been really difficult to work with, and that maybe it's no fault of their own. It was just unprecedented amounts of fires this summer. But it also kind of falls back on the federal government in a sense where climate change is real, and we should be addressing, you know, what it's going to look like to not only fight fires across this country, but what it's going to look like for people that are in remote communities. You know, my mom lives in a northern community up north in Saskatchewan, and there's kind of, you get to the point where some of these communities are one highway in, one highway out, or maybe there isn't even a highway, it's fly in. So I think for next year, we need to have a real contingency plan. And also, the government can't just be thinking out loud what they think would be best. They actually need to physically work with a lot of these communities. do you have plans in place? Are you giving them the resources ahead of time to do the data analytics on who all of these families are, how many kids are on the res, and maybe that way if there are emergencies, there's backup plans, because that also disrupted kids in school and things like that. So it had a trickle down effect that I just feel like we were not resourced properly to handle.
It's one thing, Nigan, to talk about, government response or lack thereof, but there's a human impact as well. And two of these issues that we were just talking about were part of a recent article that you wrote on the perpetual state of trauma related to this past wildfire season. Numerous nations went home to water treatment systems that weren't working. Can you talk a bit about that?
So, what would it be like to live in a perpetual state of trauma or emergency? People at Nisitcheswiak Cree Nation, or NCN here in Manitoba, have been in situations in which they never really unpack their bags. Home for a few weeks, then they're dealing with emergencies from wildfires. There's also chronic issues of trauma in the communities, and that trauma then perpetuates itself in situations of addictions, which results in violence. How many states of emergency do we have to deal with in this community 4 times in 1 year? And that then impacts people to be able to finish their high school. It impacts from people to be able to feel safe within the community, to create relationships and good governance. It's creating a huge sense of toxicity amongst people who then don't respect those in leadership or those who are in power, or even elders. It is just a situation that when you get emergency upon emergency and about emergency, it really doesn't matter how much money, how much resources. It's just a situation in which people can never really get their breath, never really get a chance to recover before they're constantly dealing with another emergency. And for too many First Nations all across the country, they are in perpetual states of trauma that is not only alarming, but it almost becomes deaf for many Canadians' ears. Many people think, oh, well, here's another one, or I don't have to listen to this one, or this doesn't impact me. It absolutely impacts the healthcare system, the justice system, the child welfare system, and so on. Every single one of us is paying for these continual states of emergency.
Jennifer Nigan, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks as always.
You gotcha.
Still to come here tonight, previews of an all-new episode of APTN Investigates and tonight's Nation to Nation. We're back in 2.5 minutes. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Benjamin sent in a photo that really captures the beauty of the fall season. He didn't tell us where the photo was taken, so be sure to always tell us about your photo. The when and where is always appreciated. If you have a great fall photo or maybe some Halloween decorations, we want to see them. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, sunny and 14 for Fredericton, sun's out and 17 for Halifax. Showers and 5 for Kuujjuaq, sunny and 8 in Nain. 9 for Montreal, cloudy and 3 for Val-d'Or. 6 for Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay, 10 in Ottawa. 5 in Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout, 2 in Kapuskasing. 6 for God's Lake, 7 in Norway House. 8 in Winnipeg, sunny and 15 for Dauphin. 18 in Regina, 13 in Saskatoon. Sunny and 12 for Meadow Lake, 7 in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, sunny and 12 for High Level, cloudy and 10 for Fort Chipewyan. 17 and sunny in Edmonton, sun's out and 18 for Lethbridge. 12 in Vancouver, Victoria and Kamloops. 7 in Prince George, 10 with the sun out in Fort Nelson. -7 in Old Crow, +4 in Whitehorse. 8 in Yellowknife, -2 in Norman Wells. 0 in Sax Harbor, Pawlatuck and Colville Lake. 0 for Chesterfield, 2 in Baker Lake. -5 in Resolute, 0 in Joe Haven. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where host Karen Pugliese tells us what's coming up on tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Here's what's ahead on Nation to Nation. Canada's Auditor General, Karen Hogan, just took a close look at the inner workings of Indigenous Services Canada. Let's just say nobody's putting that report card on the fridge. Hogan says if Indigenous Services changed just 4 things, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a whole heck of a lot better. Want to know what those 4 things are? I bet you do. She's going to tell me all about it, but you'll need to stick around. It's a special Karen to Karen episode of Nation to Nation. That's coming up in just a matter of minutes.
Thanks, Karen. That is just minutes away. Prisoners across Canada are producing goods for Crown corporations and more recently for public consumption. Coming up this week on an all-new episode of APTN Investigates, Brittany Guillot takes an inside look behind the walls of Canada's prison farm program, where experts warn the true cost goes far beyond dollars, raising difficult questions about dignity, rehabilitation, and justice. Here's a preview.
So we're here at Joyceville Institution. It's a minimum security facility in Kingston, Ontario, just a few hours away from Ottawa. And we're going to be attending the prison farm here to get a deeper look at prison labor and how that intersects with rehabilitation for offenders. To understand today's prison farms better, we meet with Isaiah behind the fences. He's a current prisoner at Joyceville Institution.
I learned to do a lot more field work working here. So more cultivating, plowing, working up the field.
In the fields of confinement, he finds something deeper, not just an opportunity for skills or employment.
Because I find it really connects me with the Creator, especially having this one-on-one, a lot of time to yourself as you're working around here.
It's not often connection to the land and spirituality can break through the walls of incarceration, but not all see it this way.
Are Canadians consuming goods produced in prison?
Yes. So for the first time in known Canadian history, milk produced at a prison is being pooled with the commercial streams sold to the public. So anybody who's drinking milk in this part of Canada, the P5 provinces, it's all the same pool of milk, is drinking milk now from a prison.
You can catch APTN Investigates Fields of Confinement, airing this Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on APTN, and we'll hear from Brittany here on tomorrow's newscast. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Karen and Karen are up next on Nation to Nation. Have a great night.